I'm Rohini. I'm a journalist, and I live in Bangalore. It's my hometown. It's also the place that I never write about. I'm here to actually talk to Mathangi and Andaleeb about what it is to write about place that you belong to, that you don't, what it is to make it come alive in fiction. What does it take to look around you and situate characters in a setting? How important is place after all, when most of us read for plot, or most of us read for education, or most of us read for the journey that we go along with the character. So here, but everyone knows that you have to set people somewhere, and that's what we'll talk about. Let me introduce our authors here. They're both very different, but also quite similar in many ways. Andheli Bajit is from Bangalore, and she likes to call herself a hybrid author. And she's published 25 novels of several different genres: young adult novels, horror, regular novels, short story, and of course horror, which is my favorite of hers. And she's also written short stories set in the Muslim milieu, which she has tried to do over several books. Two of her novels are now ready to be made into films, or we'll ask her whether it is films or a series of episodes or what it is, which is something that we all need during the pandemic. And she lives in Bangalore. Mathangi Subramanian, she's an Indian American author. She's also an educator. She started out like that and sort of, I think, shuffled her way out of academia into our world of writing and books. And she's also written young adult novels, children's books, and a wonderful novel now, which is A People's History of Heaven. That is her latest book. And that has has been shortlisted in several awards. And she now lives in Denver, Colorado, though I met her when we were writing partners while when she was living in Bangalore and working on one of her books, which was set in Bangalore. So we have already, both of us, had several discussions. And just before this, Andaleeb, before you all came on, Andaleeb and I also had a little bit of discussion. So we already started having the discussion before people came on. So we'll sort of start. But for those who may not have read the two of them, I thought it would be nice to listen to their words in their own voices. So maybe we can start with them reading a little bit. They've chosen the passages themselves. Andaleeb, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, Rohini, and thank you, Mysuru Literature Festival, and thank you, Mathangi, for bringing me on. I'm really honored to be a part of this, and it's really nice to have this discussion, especially with people like Rohini and Mathangi, and we are friends. We really don't get to do this, so it's kind of, we were like catching up before this whole thing started. So I'd like to read from Asmara's Summer, and I don't know how many of you've heard of it, but it's a young adult novel. And it has a story of this young girl from an upper middle class Muslim family who lives in a very posh locality, and she has to spend her summer in a not so posh locality. People who are familiar with Bangalore will know Tannery Road. So I'm just going to read a very short passage from here. So she this is unexpected, So she was supposed to go to Canada for her vacations, but that got cancelled, and she's now spending her vacations in Tannery Road with her grandparents. Ashfaq uncle is driving leisurely as though taking me to a resort with a super cool swimming pool, with waiters serving French macarons for high tea. I know when we've reached the stretch of road where Tannery Road starts, because it is blocked with traffic, blaring horns, and people on scooters trying to dodge between cars all the way. My sunglasses remain in place, and I'm trying to breathe in, breathe out, trying not to have a panic attack. So the reason why she's so overwhelmed is also because she's never told her friends that she has a connection here. So there's this whole, cool factor, and this is not a cool place to belong to, according to her. So I shut my eyes, trying to block out the vision of the road, and only open them when Ashfaq uncle stops the car. Nani's house is inside a lane called Pilana Garden. The name is a joke. There is no garden here for miles. The house in front of me is a typically middle-class, no-nonsense structure, painted in some nondescript color and flanked by similar houses on both sides. Taking a deep breath, I wonder if this is how a goat feels when it is taken for slaughter. Of course, I can't help but think of goats and cows, considering that we're so close to Doddi, the stinking slaughterhouse, which lends Tannery Road its name. I unlock the car door and push it open when Ashfaq uncle comes around and holds it for me, treating me like royalty as always. I don't want to read too much more. But as you can imagine, so this whole thing, of course, it's not like the place undergoes a change, but she undergoes a change at the end of the book, as in her attitude towards the place and the people. So I had fun writing this book, and it's one of my favorite books, and I thought maybe that would give a better idea of about what my writing is like to people. Over to you, Matangi and Rohini.
Mathangi?
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Mathangi. Today I'm reading from my book, A People's History of Heaven. I just wanted to thank Rohini and Andaleeb for doing this, and Sita, who's here for inviting us and allowing us to create this event. I'm so happy to be in conversation with both these women, so I'm very happy about that. So my latest book, A People's History of Heaven, is about a group of 5 girls who live in Bangalore, they live in a slum, and the slum is about to be destroyed. And since my book is about stolen land, in the US, I always start my reading for the land acknowledgement, which is something we do here now. So I just want to acknowledge that here in Denver, I'm on the unceded ancestral territory of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Sioux people. And I encourage you also to think about in India, where the original inhabitants of your land and the Adivasi inhabitants who maybe came before you in your cities. So the scene I'm reading now is actually from the first page of the book, and it's a description of the slum. Which is the name of the slum is Heaven, it's Swargahali, and this is a short description of the place. Ragged jigsaw of tilted tents, angry quilts of rusted roofs, maze of sagging sofas, muddy monsoon squelch, dry summer hum, jangle and clatter of gunshot tongues, firing words faster than Rajni fires bullets. That's where we're from. The people who aren't from here, they think beauty is country colors. Rice paddy green, peacock neck blue, sunsets gold and purple and pink. No one writes poems about pavement gray, road roller yellow, AC bus red. People who aren't from here can't see past the sign stuck in the ground 30 years ago. Swargahali, it once said. English letters straight like soldiers, Kannada letters curved like destiny. Now it's been split in 2, cracked by one of the bulldozers the city sent to erase us the first time, or maybe the second or the third. After a while, we stopped counting. All that's left is the word Swarga. Swarga, people ask, as in Sanskrit for heaven. This place? Heaven, we say with them, this place? Sometimes they laugh. Sometimes we do too, but most of the time we don't. Because the sign isn't right, but it's not wrong either. Thank you.
It's interesting that both of you chose to read something about, which was quite descriptive, in which both of you are going into detail of what that place is. And I'll start with a kind of broad question. When you are setting your story somewhere, is it an automatic decision about where it will be? Or I think, because Mathangi, you have set both your books, 2 books set in Bangalore, and I think you came up with the ideas maybe when you were there. So is it an automatic thing? Is it just a setting? Is it a location? And obviously in both the books that you both read from, the place also is a huge character. It influences the people who are in it. The people have thoughts about the place, very strong thoughts that they express throughout the book. So how important is the setting of a book? How much should writers think about it? Mathangi, you can go first.
Okay, so I think right before we started, Rohini, you were mentioning how it's hard to write now because we're inside and you like being sort of out in the world and writing. So that is how my process is too. So in Bangalore, I was actually there on a fellowship to study early childhood education centers. And I started spending time in these Anganwadis. Sorry, I realize I'm doing an Indian event, so I can say Anganwadis, and you all know exactly what that is. So I was in these Anganwadis, and I hadn't realized that they're some of the only places where poor women in India can gather freely. And so I had intended to do academic research, but suddenly I was surrounded by all of these different voices of everyone from, the preschooler from the slum to the widow who had lived in the slum for 40 years to the new mother who was 19. And these voices sort of led to the creation of the book, and both books actually. And of course, because they are so anchored in the place, it was very important for me to make the place an important part of the story. I think also writing about a place like Bangalore, Andaleeb mentioned this in her just now when she was reading. Bangalore has changed so much in such a short period of time that for me, the city's change was sort of echoing the changes that the characters were going through in this book in particular, not so much in Dear Mrs. Naidu, but definitely in this place. I think setting is a really important part of writing, because I think setting is not just a character, but it's the rules of the world, right? It's the stakes, kind of. So if your characters are changing, or something is happening to them, they're facing some journey or some conflict, the place is what sets the rules of that conflict, right? So how the characters act, what opportunities they have, what their sort of ideas of themselves and the context are. So in that sense, place is important because it can really immerse you in a setting and make you get lost in a story. But I think it's also important because it really determines a lot of the characters' choices in terms of their arc.
Andaleeb, how important is it to you? Do you think similarly?
I think she covered a lot of what I also agree with, Initially, I think the reason why I chose Bangalore was because you have this this broad rule that, you write about what you know. So I know Bangalore. I've lived here all my life. So I kind of also find that very restricting, because I haven't lived anywhere else. As in, I've traveled, but I haven't lived anywhere. So that lived experience for me is always fuller and always more complete when I write about Bangalore. So even, so for me, I feel like setting plays a huge role. As Mathangi very aptly said, certain rules apply when, when you are setting your characters in a particular place, everything kind of is in a relation to that. My first novel was also partly set in Vellore, and it's in Tamil Nadu, and my character's choices, her behavior, what she could do in Bangalore, and she couldn't do that in Vellore. So these were things that I could bring out that difference. So obviously, these are things that I haven't really paid much thought to until recently. So yeah, I also agree, setting plays a huge role. So it's now, of course, thanks to the internet and the ability to write about places you've never been to. I always found that very shady to actually write about a place that I've never been to. How can I do that? But I kind of managed to pull it off with one of my romance novels. I set it in Maldives. Never been there, but people who've read it say that it feels like you've been there. So I think you just kind of get used to it. But like I said, the lived experience is very different.
So when you're talking about lived experience, it's probably I don't know, a lot of the things that you won't find in a travelogue, or you won't find on Wikipedia. You may find it by knowing somebody from there for a really long time. I guess even if you're not from there, these are the, I guess, I'm speaking as a journalist who's always writing about other places and people from and trying to be as authentic. So can you talk about even when writing about a place you know so well, that you have grown up in, or have spent considerable amount of time diving into, even like Mathangi you've done, into a part of that larger city of Bangalore, and from there you have learned things and it's kind of struck you as worth writing about, or it's inspired you in some way. But is there, when you're writing about even those worlds, you still, our actual worlds are much smaller even within a city. So is there a certain essence to a city? Is there a spirit of a place that you're writing about, or there are stereotypes maybe which you have to bounce off of, which you have to capture, or which you have to undo? Do you feel, how do you represent that place? Andaleeb, like, you write a lot about upper middle class and middle class worlds, and many of your books have characters set there, and they may be going in and out of some of the other kinds of worlds, but those are almost mundane worlds which are almost our own. How do you make it come alive? How do you bring drama into it? How, I mean, in our own world, which we live completely normally in?
So I kind of like to describe my writing, especially the newer writing that I have done is about, say the extraordinary situations and extraordinary lives of ordinary people. So even when I'm writing romances, they're not about rich billionaires, they're about people like you and me. And I think so that's why a lot of people find them very relatable. If like you've read in 29 going on 30, there is no rich billionaire and who's flying down on a jet, which is a typical trope that Mills and Boone and romance novels use, but I kind of find that very unreal. So for me, setting plays not not that big a part, but for me, when I'm writing, it's more to do with the characters, with the, unless it's a book about a place, like I was talking to you about House of Screams. So this is set in an actual lane in Richmond town called Myrtle Lane. So there is a sort of bhutia bangla sort of place over there, but which I just kind of reimagined and made it into something else. So it is really subjective. It depends on the story I'm writing and what is required. So the place plays a huge role in books like Asmara's Summer, where there is a shift from this from one place to another, and in some books it doesn't really matter. It kind of it's always on the periphery. So it really depends on the kind of book that I'm writing, where and I don't know, sometimes these are conscious decisions, sometimes they're not. Like Asmara Summer, the idea came to me as I was passing by Tannery Road in an auto, and I was thinking, like, I just, everything just came to me, like, so imagine a girl, slightly hoity-toity types, and if she has to come and live here, and she'll be like, her first thought will be like, oh my god, I will die, this sort of a place. But then how does she how does she get herself accustomed to it, or how does she change things to make it bearable for her? So it really is a function of that.
I guess that it's about creating some sort of friction or some conflict within what is available. And, actually the Tannery Road thing, I read some of that book. For me, especially, it struck because my mother used to work in a bank there. And every time she would take me along with her to the bank. And it was a Pilana Garden branch. So, yeah, so what you read, and we used to go there, and I really expected to see a garden. And I thought for years, when she said she was going to Pilana Garden branch, I thought there would be a garden, but there were butcheries, and there were, fistula clinics, and so I was driving through. I remember, and every time she would park the bike in a small shed and come out, we would walk straight. And my mother is vegetarian, and she would walk straight, not looking either side. But she loved the place. She had that arc which Amara has. So she, in a way, so it does have, I mean, some unlikely resonances. So, writing about Mathangi, that's what I wanted to ask you, because writing about almost uninhabitable places, almost unsavory places, which people don't want to live in. The people who are there themselves have mixed feelings about, and it's, but yet there is something of what you do repeatedly is to make people somehow talk about it with both pride and there is no disgust. There is pride, there is acceptance, and there is no shortage of drama in many of these places, right? So how do you still make that connection to the kind of reader who may not be from there? How do you think about it? How do you respect people from there and write with the empathy about places and people from such places?
So I think some of it, as Andaleeb just said, some of it is subconscious, right? Like some of these characters, I was doing my research, and then I met children or women who inspired the characters in both of the books. But I think an important thing for me is I like to write until I surprise myself. So I think one of the reasons that I wrote Heaven is because I also expected to go into the slums and I'm sort of ashamed to say this, but I expected to be disgusted. I expected it to be uninhabitable and just a place of sorrow. But the thing is, these are human beings who live in these places, and that means they have human lives, which means that they have both joy and they have sorrow. They have, we all have drama, whether we're middle class or not. So they have their own kinds of drama. So I think one thing I really like to do is to write about things that I don't expect and smaller worlds sort of within places. So, and I think part of the place that comes from for me is that I'm Indian, but I grew up in the US, so I'm Indian American. So I've always felt a bit strange and a bit different. I've always felt like my home was very different than the world that I was in, because I grew up in predominantly white communities with a very different religion, very different culture. So I think when I go into a place, I'm just programmed to try and figure out what the place is like and where I can fit and what the good things are. So it's almost like a survival instinct, right? Like, where are the places where I could fit into this world and still live? And I think that survival instinct is what helps me sort of be empathetic. There's also, I'm trained as an anthropologist. So there's an idea in anthropology called strange making. And it's this idea that you go into a setting that you think is familiar and you try and look at everything as though it's brand new and strange. And by doing that, you really have to examine a lot of your assumptions, and you have to sort of change the way that you see things, because you have to, the basis of strange making is the idea that you don't actually know what you're seeing. That a thing that you think is familiar has elements to it that you haven't necessarily seen before. So I think when I go into new settings, that's what I try to do, both because of my past and because of my academic training and I think who I am. But I'm not from Bangalore. I only lived there for the 2.5, 3 years that I was there. But I was so immersed in the place that I felt okay about writing it. But I'm like Andaleeb in the sense that I know there's this idea that if you do research, you can write any character or any place. But I feel most comfortable writing about the place that I am at that moment. I think just because you're so immersed in the place. I think your subconscious, like Andaleeb is saying, does a lot of work to create stories in the place that you are. And for me, when I'm removed in a new place, my subconscious starts working on a totally new set of rules and a new kind of set of characters.
It's very fascinating because this thing of speaking from my own perspective, I find it really hard to examine my world, examine my hometown with eyes that I usually keep very sharply for other worlds. And I've often thought of it as some sort of block. Sometimes I think I don't want the worlds to collide. And as rich as my own world, my life is, and everything around me is, from the vegetable vendor to a childhood friend, as rich as those are, to make them written, to kind of translate them into, say, even fiction or narrative nonfiction, for me, I find very hard. So when you're writing these are real worlds that you're tweaking here and there. You've called the slum that you're writing about, that gets a part of which get demolished, you call it Swarga, but you've set it in a very familiar place that I can recognize because I lived in that area before. And about the airport the airplanes that you could hear and the dismantling of it is the HAL airport, which changed, and now you have so you can identify, but it's not important even if I didn't know. How do you create a fictional world with the characters in it, and make it coherent? Is it again? I know. I wonder if it is, how much of it is conscience. For example, naming it Swarga, which is an ironic. You're trying to, but at the same time, it's an aspiration. So, Mathangi, maybe can you talk about that, creating that fictional world from very real inspiration?
Yeah, and that's an interesting question. I think I don't. It's hard for me to say because I don't really know how I do it. So I have to sort of think aloud as here. And I don't know if Andaleeb feels this way too. Yeah. Sometimes the stories just happen and like but it's good. These questions are good because you have to actually go back and examine what you do. I think the setting is very much, there's very recognizable places in the setting, like you're saying, like there's graffiti that shows up at a 5-star hotel, which is clearly the Lila. There's HAL Airport. There's definitely places in Kodihali where I did my research that are very clear in the book. I think the part that I fictionalize more is the characters and what they're doing. And I think that then necessitates adjusting the setting to some extent. I also do a lot, like I drew a map of Swarga and the surroundings because I would get so confused about like what, and the map changed a little bit, but I had it when I was editing because like there's one scene where they take a route to school and I had to actually draw the route to school as I imagined it to write about it. Yeah, but I think it's really, I mean, I write character-driven fiction, so I think for me, everything else sort of falls into place around the characters. And the geography to me is less important than the sort of feeling of the world, like the sensory feeling. And then also, like I was saying, the rules. So how it feels to be a girl in that world, how it feels to be poor in that world. So I think those things are the things that I lift directly. And the rest of it, I sort of adjust based on what the characters need. I'm working on a memoir right now because I'm home alone not alone, I'm with my family, but you know, I can't be out in the world right now because of the pandemic. And it's really, it's a good challenge, but it's frustrating because I can't change things to what I need them to be, right? Because I'm writing about what actually happened. So I can't make those adjustments, and I'm definitely feeling that. So I think that's also something I'm really noticing right now. But I'd be really curious to hear what you do, Andaleeb, because I think not only have you written like so many different books, but I feel like your Bangalore is so recognizable and yet so clearly fictionalized. I'd love to hear how you do it.
I actually, you know, I really don't think about it very consciously. It's what I actually started when I started writing. Like I said, you know, there was this whole thing where you write about places that you know, or sorry, you write what you know. And what I remembered was this, I'm not sure, did they, like, you know, that Jane Austen's books, that 6 inches of ivory is what it's called, right? They called, I don't know, is it an essay someone wrote? Oh God, my bad memory is really coming to, embarrass me. But so for me, it was something to do with that, you know, when I was initially writing, I was writing about Muslim women, and the idea that people have about Muslim women being oppressed or cloistered. And I wanted to show that whatever it is, that these are lives, and they're not necessarily oppressed. Not all of them are oppressed. And there is one of the things that really struck me when I wrote my first novel was a number of people who wrote back to me saying, but this is just like our experience. So it was a coming of age novel called Kite Strings, and it was about a young girl trying to figure out what she wants to do in her life. So that it's as simple, but I set it in a very conservative Muslim family, much like my own. So a lot of people came back to me saying that this is what we went through too. This is what, this sort of confusion, this, rebel without a cause sort of thing. So basically what I feel is that experiences are are universal. Most experiences are universal. The degree to which you feel certain things, again, is a function of the place that you are from. And in my story, the girl comes from Vellore, which is much more orthodox and conservative than Bangalore. So all that kind of, plays into it. And it's just something, so characters, places, these are conscious decisions I make. But once the story starts coming in, and you said you write very character driven stories, mine are very plot heavy, because they are, it's at what we call pulp fiction, and it's easily consumable, and people like read it in one sitting because they just want to enjoy and just take their mind off. So the plot, it has to be like really tight. So sometimes, more often than not, the place doesn't really figure that much, as in just another aspect to the book, that okay, it's set in Bangalore. at some point of time, I was kind of feeling fed up of setting my own books in Bangalore. And I was like, come on, let me just, I need to set it somewhere else. I'm just going crazy. So a huge part of one of my books, More Than Just Biryani, was set in Hong Kong. And that is another country that I have a connection with growing up, because my father had a business there and we would go there. I could say I've lived there, maybe in the sense that, a couple of months during summer vacations as a child. So those memories are, of course, not, that fresh, but I was able to kind of translate that into, writing about a place as such. So I'm rambling, no?
No, not at all. I actually wanted to ask you, when you're saying you're going crazy writing about Bangalore, what is, can you define crazy? As in,
because
one of the places to set it in, or what?
No, because I just felt it's just repetitive, and I, that, oh God, she always writes about Bangalore, so I didn't want readers to just think that, okay, so, all my life I've kind of tried to escape this whole thing about Muslims eating biryani. When I wrote a book called More Than Just Biryani, and people call me biryani writer. So it's like, and now I'm also I absolutely am perfectly fine being called the Bangalore writer, but also Bangalore has so many writers, so Bangalore is one of the cities, so many writers. So I just felt like, I can't just write about Bangalore as because I'm from here. It kind of just becomes dated for me, especially when you're writing so much. And so if you're writing, say, one book in 2 years, and you've really put all your attention in it and everything, so you write about a very richly layered book, and you write it about this place, okay, fine. But my books are not like that. They're just fun. And okay, I don't want to denigrate my own books, but
no, I would like to actually though say, perhaps in both of you, you're both saying that that you're probably not making certain decisions consciously, but as a reader and as someone who has closely read a couple of your books in this week, I think that what you're saying, Andheli, there is a certain. I was part of once a workshop, just as context, where somebody was trying to write fiction and was like, I'm just so tired of this guy during a fight with his wife, going from one room to the other and opening the door and shutting the door. So it was like that space was, he was tired of writing in that scene, the movement within a small 2 rooms, right, within the house. And those are, may not be geography, but in setting a scene, that spatial awareness. And you may not go into detail of Bangalore in some parts or wherever the setting is. But just for example, in 29 Going on 30, you have the stairs and the lift, which recur again and again. And it is the setting for a kind of butterflies in the stomach moment. You're hoping it happens every time when you're reading it. This girl goes up. Every time she comes home or leaves home, she's hoping to maybe see her crush in the lift or on the stairs. And it is a place that keeps coming back in again and again in your book. And so maybe it's not something you did consciously, but for me, it was like, so every time you have somebody interesting in your building, it is the kind of thing, the building suddenly becomes totally dramatic, right? Even in your head. So, I actually think that maybe there is more to also writing in a tight way. It's part of the plot, as you're saying, but there is that building itself becomes full of characters and full of, so it may not even be Bangalore. Most of it happens in 2 buildings, I guess, in the book. I was again there was this N.K. Jemisin. So she recently won the Hugo Award for Broken Earth. And when you set the fantasy world, how to create, she has this workshop that she does on creating a world. And there's this thing that she says that I have to create a macro world and then a micro world. So the macro world is, of course, these are fantasy fiction worlds, but these rules seem really apt even for creating a world very close to home. Something like Malgudi Days, something like.
Can you please share this with me, because yes. I really.
Yeah, something like Malgudi Days, or I would say even in Suitable Boy, Brahmpur, which is like kind of like Lucknow, but it's not. It's smaller. Or of course Terry Pratchett's world, Ankh-Mott Caucus. There are certain, as you said, Mathangi, there are certain rules in these worlds, and the kind of macro world affects the people in it. If the environment is hot or desert-like, are the people? What is the kind of people who will live there, what are the kind of jobs they do, how it influences their culture. If it's a micro world, what is the society like? And one thing that really stuck with me is she says it's ultimately the world building is about power. And it's about who wields power and who is being stripped of it. So all of this thought sort of, that is what I think makes a world feel lived in. Uh, so Matangi, I think it feels very, and I know that you've thought through these things. So when you're creating that world, and it's like a spectrum of different levels of power that people hold, just like in our daily life, which we know implicitly, almost we know it like second skin. How do you use that for plot? How do you use that to tell a story and those shifting balances of power?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to put a plug for N.K. Jemisin. She's an African-American sci-fi writer. And not only is her work brilliant, but the way she thinks about her work is also very good. And I think a lot of Black sci-fi writers think the way that she thinks. And I also think similarly. So for me, when I was writing both of my books, the sort of macro world was Bangalore, and the macro world was also these power structures, right? So like patriarchy, casteism, classism, right? And I think when you it's important to engage with those structures. And I think so I'm also reading right now, actually I have it right here. I'm reading this book by this Japanese American writer called A Stranger's Journey. And it's a craft book about race and identity. And it talks about how writers of color often engage with these power structures in a way in the US that white writers don't, because the power structures affect us as people of color so intensely, whereas white writers can sort of ignore them. So I think when I was in Bangalore, a couple of things happened. First of all, I became a very privileged person for the first time in my life. I'm Hindu, I'm high caste, I'm American educated. And whereas in the US, I always had to sort of fight to be heard, suddenly in India, all of these power structures were sort of bending to allow me to write, to allow me to publish, to allow me to do research. And so when I was writing my books, I was very conscious both of the power structures that were giving me power and of the structures that were sort of taking away power from people within these worlds. So I think that's one element of setting that I'm very conscious of, just because I've had to be conscious of it my whole life, and because it was such a shift when I came to India. But I think reacting also to what you said and what Andaleeb said earlier, like you can write about Bangalore, but then you could also write about Tannery Row, or you could write about this one building with this one lift and this one staircase, right? So even when we're talking about writing about place, there's so many places within a place, and there's so many rules. Like a Muslim family is going to have different rules than a Hindu family, right? An American family living in, when I lived in Delhi and was raising my child there, my rules for her were very, very different than my neighbor's rules, because I learned how to parent in the US and she learned how to parent in India, right? So no matter who you're writing about or where you're writing about, there's these structures of power and these sort of smaller pieces of setting that I think the more you carve them out and define them, I think the more alive the world becomes. Yeah. And I was trying to think if I have been driven crazy by writing about one place, but I think one thing that's been both hard and a blessing for me is that I've just lived so many different places that I've never really felt like a place is home. So every time I'm in a place, I feel like a stranger, and I wonder if I'm allowed to write about that place. And I'm always figuring places out. And I think that's why place has such a big role in the things I write, is I'm always trying to figure out the rules because I'm always new, right? So I would love to live somewhere long enough to be driven crazy by writing about it, I think.
Can I just add something to this? Yeah. So, very interestingly, what you said, like I have lived only in Bangalore, So for me, when I'm visiting another city, so like, right from the time I was a child, I was a teenager, say I was visiting Chennai, and if I was on the road and in a car, and I always had the strangest disconnect, that I am here on a visit, but these people over here, they all have lives here and they're going to their places. But I am just here. I'm very transient. I think I had this very strong sense of transience very, very strongly wherever I went, but that was missing. That is not there in the only place which I call home, which is Bangalore, because I belong here. So I feel very strongly about it. And it's one of the reasons why very naturally, very subconsciously, automatically, I tend to write about Bangalore, because this is home. And I feel like you said, whether you're allowed to write or not, I feel like I'm allowed to write about this because I belong here. And I just thought I felt like adding that.
I actually would like to probe that a little bit, and there are some questions that are already coming in which kind of allude to that. This, and earlier we were talking about this belonging and about the right to write about it, right? How much importance does that question often come in your mind? It seems to have, from what you're saying. I often don't have that question at all. Then if I had that question in my mind at all the time, and then it would stop me from doing my job as a journalist, to go to different places and write. So at some point, I think I came to a balance of doing writing about a place as much as I can, even if it's not mine, so that it is still identifiable for and feels authentic for the people from there. But that question within, if I was writing fiction, there is far more you have to do with it, right? About the people, about the society. So how much do you think about it? And do you get this question? Do you have the right? And Mathangi, Andheli, you can say first, and then Mathangi, maybe you can talk about if you ever think of writing a book set in the US, which you are from. But you and I think you haven't set a fictional world there yet, in Colorado or wherever where you grew up. So how the question of, do we have to belong to be able to write about a place?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. And belonging also is a very subjective thing. What makes a person belong? Someone who's lived in a city, say, for 5 years is, as much, belongs to the city. It's not just about, whether you belong, whether the city belongs to you, right? I think that's what we're trying to talk about here. The kind of the sense of ownership that you feel towards a city is, it's not about you belonging to a place, but the place belonging to you. That's the whole crux of the, I feel, a lot of people have this thing that this is my city, as opposed to, I belong to this city. So when that comes in, so I can always tell people that I have been living in Bangalore for what, 4 decades now. But that does not make me more of a Bangalorean than someone who's lived here for 5 years and who identifies with it, who has probably traveled to various parts of the city, which I have never been to, So it's all very subjective, and I don't think of it. I really don't think, and I think it's also a product of growing older and having a lot more books under my belt, giving me the confidence that I don't have to just write about Bangalore. It's kind of fun to look up a place where maybe I have visited, so I don't feel so much of a cheat. So like I can probably I've visited Pune, so okay, maybe I can set my story there. I can, okay, at least I've been there. It's not like a completely, writing about a place which I have not been to. But also, why not? It's fiction. It's fiction, and fiction is anyway supposed to be made up stuff. So if I can write about it, give a sort of authentic experience to what I'm writing about, and why not? So this is a shift that's happened to me in the past couple of years, actually, where I feel like, okay, I can write about other places, even if I've not visited those places also. So, but I also think, that this whole belonging thing is a very strong element, where I've been asked by people, where are you from? So, which is a question that I really don't know. I'm like, I'm from here. But you're not a Kannadiga. So I said, yeah, but I'm a Tamilian. I don't really identify myself as a Tamilian, but I'm from Tamil Nadu, but I'm also from here. Why can't I be from both places, So, and also to make this even more, what do I say, controversial, I also used to get this, but you're a Muslim. So I'm like, what? So I can't belong to any place because I'm a Muslim. So, is it because, so is my identity less, regional identity less because I'm a Muslim? So thankfully, I think people don't ask me that any longer, but that used to be a question that used to come up when I was in school and college. So, it takes a little bit of introspection, where you start thinking that really, where am I from? Am I really, that sort of that, which is a huge problem, that whole sense of pride of belonging to a place. So
It's fascinating. It's really, really something that, based on identity, people often ask these questions. Even if you identified as a Tamilian, they would say then you're not from Bangalore, or there is always a and it is a very there is always that struggle. And I really wish sometimes that even when you're saying it feels like I don't want to feel like a cheat. At least I visited that place. I wish we all had, and especially like women and brown black people had the confidence that white colonial men had. Up Bangladesh or Calcutta, and if sitting in somewhere in London, or even not even London, and write a whole world and set people there, and the kind of books that we grew up reading, which had imagined our worlds as our worlds were not at all. Like sometimes I wish we had the confidence, as even
we'll
white.
get there. We'll get there.
No, I think. Sorry, I was just gonna say, I think that's what I react to, like when I am deciding whether to write about that place, is like growing up on those colonial books that wrote about us in such the wrong way. Like I don't want to be that person, who writes about a place in such a wrong way. Andaleeb, I don't know if you feel that way too.
No, I'm not saying wrong way. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about the confidence to be able to write about any place, not, I don't want to write about a place in any wrong way.
No, correct. But I think what you're saying about confidence, what you're saying about confidence is so true. No, and I somehow don't think you are going to write about a place in a wrong way like that.
No, I just feel that, growing older has shown me that, okay, I can write about this. It's okay, and the confidence is what I feel like Rohini said, the confidence is a huge aspect of it, being able to write about a place. I still don't feel very confident to write about Mumbai or Delhi. Okay, I'm like, okay, maybe I can try my hands at the smaller metros and, the smaller cities. And so it's all a question of, over the years, how I've grown up reading and writing, and I immediately feel like someone's going to say, this is rubbish. This place doesn't exist. What you've written about this, no matter how much research I do. So I feel, so those are the things that kind of play on me, on my mind. I'm really happy creating a fictional world. So I, in fact, set one of my novels, which is published with Juggernaut, actually, called It Waits. I set it in it's a horror novel, and it was set in a fictional town in Coorg. I don't know why I chose that. I thought I've always liked Coorg. I've never been to Coorg, by the way. So I kind of had fun creating that world. So
there's hope for the confidence that we all are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the thing, right? So writing, and also there is a greater, sometimes maybe a role that, like how conscious Andaleeb is writing about the Muslim world and those questions that you have to kind of internalize and then brush off after.
Actually, I'm not conscious about writing, to interrupt you, I'm not conscious about writing about the Muslim world. I think when I'm writing about a Muslim world, I'm actually kind of, I don't feel like I am okay, it's upon my hands to represent the community or anything. It's just the characters are Muslim. It's very incidental, but also because of that, it has a very rich, layered, way of life, which is not, not a lot of people are not privy to that, because so little has been written about this. And the whole stereotypes, whatever little that you see on Bollywood, which is very strange. You don't identify with it. So, in that way, identifiable characters is more of my thing. And if they're Muslim, it's just incidental.
Yeah. No, what I meant by conscious is is knowing that world is something that's not been written about, and being conscious of your place, your voice in doing that, right? So, and now more and more, we need those marginalized worlds, those silenced worlds or misrepresented worlds to be shown in our books. They are not just important, but it is enjoyable, and it makes books far richer to have kind of more variety of representations of different kinds of places. So I mean, that's what I meant by conscious, and more and more in literature, people are thinking of that, writers are thinking of that, and Mathangi, as you said earlier, like there is time when you're writing about something. It's also not just the now, it's suffused with the before and what is going to happen. Yeah, go
Can
ahead.
I actually just say something to what you just said? Sorry to interrupt. So I actually have written books set in the US.
Yeah.
It's just nobody wanted to publish them. So this was before I found an agent. Some of it might be because my craft just wasn't good enough. But I think some of it is also, like Andaleeb was saying, like my books set in the US are about Indian Americans. And that's not because I made a conscious choice, but that's who I am. And that's me writing what I know and the world that I know. And that world is interesting to me because it's the world that I inhabit. So I do want to start writing books set in the US, but I tend to write wherever I am. And for the past 6 years, I had the time and the space and the privilege to write in India. And so that's sort of where my worlds have been set. But I think there is this interesting idea, at least here, and maybe it's also in India, but I'm not conscious because I'm very privileged there, that there's certain settings and characters that are marketable and certain settings and characters that are not. So here in the US, this is slowly changing, but there's this idea that if you write about Indian Americans, only Indian Americans will read it, right? So the publishing industry is not very open to sort of other kinds of points of view. And so that really limits like your settings, that limits your characters, that limits the kinds of stories that you can tell if you want to sell a book. Now, if you just want to write what you want to write and see what happens, like that's different. And I also just wanted to say that I really appreciated that Andaleeb was saying that she feels like people who have lived in Bangalore for 5 years, 10 years belong there just as much as someone has lived there their whole life. Because, living in Bangalore and then now I'm living in Denver, which is similar to Bangalore in that it was a small town that is now kind of becoming, I mean, it was always considered a big city, but it's changing, like the demographics are changing. Some of the way it's changing is more people of color are coming in, which I think is good. But I think there's a sense of people that there's like sort of two kinds of people. There's the people who sort of welcome that change. And then there's people who are like, who use their belonging and their place to exclude other people, right? So I loved what Andaleeb said about saying you can be from many places at once. You don't have to be from just one place. You don't have to belong to just one place. And I think as writers, when we're thinking about what that means, we're very powerful because we can create these cultural tools to say, like, there are Muslims in Bangalore and they belong there. There are brown people in the US and they belong there. And this part of the setting and this place is these people. So one thing I really appreciate when I, as a writer is just being able to change the consciousness about that, because when you put characters in a world where people don't expect them, suddenly it becomes a place where they could belong and you can change people's expectations.
So when you write, so can you tell me can you talk more about that, the politics of writing about where you're from, but those stories are not often heard in the mainstream. So when you write that, even in the work that you have and you're waiting to publish them, how much did you think about those things? And it's important to have your voice out there. And, you may not be representing everybody, but the very fact that your life and your experience will bring a different perspective to the writing.
Well, I would really be curious to hear what you think about this. But in my experience, it's like this editorial voice in my head being like, why are you writing about Indian Americans in America? Like, nobody's going to buy this. Nobody's going to care. This is such a specific experience. But I think there's sort of two things I think about that. First of all, I grew up reading almost all white writers. And the idea that that is a specific experience, but I'm outside that experience and read and enjoyed some of those books is sort of proof that it doesn't matter what the characters are. If you're a good writer and you write really exciting plots or you write characters that are really believable, it doesn't matter where they come from, right? Like the goal of writing is to transcend that. And so you see yourself in the character and you also learn something from the character, right? So for me, I'm trying more and more to think about telling a good story and worry less about the sellability of it. And it's funny because I wasn't even worried about that before I published. I just wrote because I loved to write. And I never thought of it as a career. I never thought of it as a risk. It was just what I was working on at the time. If it got published, okay. If it didn't. But now that I know that there might be an audience and I feel pressure to sell things, I think about it a lot more often than I did. And I think, for some of us where we live, this wasn't true of me in India, but it's definitely true of me here. Just being in this body, in this place is political. Like you can't escape the politics of it because people don't see you as belonging here. My parents are immigrants. My husband is an immigrant. My daughter is an immigrant. And our president right now is very anti-immigrant. He's very anti-Black and brown people. So I feel like my writing is deemed political just because I'm writing what I know, and I'm at the nexus of so many sort of political things happening. And so, you know, it is political because my life is political, not because I want it to be or need it to be, but because that's who I am in this country.
Hmm. I'd like you also to add
Yeah.
something to this, and then we'll
So-
ask questions which are coming from the audience. So we'll sort of
Okay. Yeah. So what I actually was thinking was that, you know, when I wrote my first novel, it was more than, I think, 10 years ago. I wrote it 12 years ago. It took 2 years to get published. Yeah. I mean, to find a publisher. I really couldn't, a couple of people may have told me that, why are you writing about this whole Orthodox Muslim family, which, you know, who wants to read about these things? You know, I remember a couple of people telling me, why on earth would you set your story in Vellore? Who even wants to read about it? But I had written the book and I was like, no, this is my story and this is how it's going to be. I think going forward, it took a while for me to find a publisher. I don't think it was because my story was about Muslims, or, you know, it's set in Vellore and partly in Bangalore. I don't think it was because of that, but because it was not written that well, that I didn't find a good publisher instantly. I didn't know anything about plot. I didn't know anything about characterization. I just wrote. So, but also it's to do with something that, you know, I've been reading a lot of Indian fiction much before Indian fiction became, you know, this what it is today. So like in 2000, in the year 2000, in 1999, I was reading Indian fiction, which, you know, whatever there was. And one thing that I drew from that was that I'm going to write about, I mean, if these people can write about their places and their people, then I'm going to write about my people and my places, you know. So I didn't let that deter me. And it kind of, I didn't even think of it as, you know, being a USP, that, you know, you don't have people about writing about this. It never occurred to me. And it's kind of worked in my favor for that reason. Initially, you know, it took a little bit of time for people to sit up and acknowledge this, that there is something different, that, you know, that there was this whole question of like, but why? But I was like, why not? Why can't I write about Ammi and Abu and all those people, and not just, you know, write about the kind of stuff like Mathangi said, you know, grew up reading white writers and, you know, their characters. Why on earth would I write about those people? So it's been very fixated in me that I'm going to write about what I am, what I know, and where I live. So it's kind of been all you know, an amalgamation of all that.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. I mean, and you know, there are some questions for both of you. I'm just going to ask them. Also, if there's more questions, please send them. And Mathangi has to leave sooner than the two of us. So there's lots of actually craft questions which I will come to later. Somebody has asked. Michael Loren has asked, how can fiction writers match setting with time? I mean, I guess he means when you are looking at a place but at a different time. Somebody has also said that they remember Tannery Road from the 70s. Yeah. So, is there something you'd like to say about time? How you know, the role of time in your books? Andaleeb, maybe you want to start.
I've written actually two. It's a trilogy. I don't have the first book with me, you know. So it's a trilogy, 3-book series. It's a time travel story of a girl, you know, a girl from 2012 who travels back 20 years in time to 1982. So Bangalore of 1982 was, you know, I was of course very small then, and I just, you know, sat down with my uncles and I, you know, racked their brains and tried to get, you know, what life was. A lot of it is nostalgia. So writing about time and place, I think, is very it's very, you know, it depends on the book, you know. So since I was writing time travel, I was able to go back in time and write about a Bangalore which is very different than a Bangalore that it is today. So I don't know if this answers the question, but, you know, it just kind of occurred to me. I've written a time travel story set in Bangalore. So
So, you know, you said about nostalgia. Mathangi, have you thought about when you're thinking about time?
I think a time is a very important part of setting, actually. And especially if you're writing something historical, I think the details of that history are an important part of what the place is. Now, for me, my book, Heaven has multiple timelines, which I know many of Andaleeb's books do as well. So for me, the question is not so much, well, first of all, time and in setting can be very helpful for sort of anchoring these multiple timelines and helping the reader keep track, right? So if you have certain details that are specific to a history and you put them in that timeline, it's easier for the readers to kind of keep track of where they are in time. For me, the biggest craft questions about time are perspective and tense. So what's going to be in the present, what's going to be in the past, who's going to be narrating what. So those are the craft questions for me with time, but time is definitely an important part of how I think of settings.
So this craft thing, you're saying, can you talk more about the craft of the time? I think in your books also you do I noticed it when I read closely, but otherwise when you're reading it, you know when you're looking at the mom's life and when you're looking at the daughter's life. Yeah, how do you work on it?
So this is, I'm glad that you could tell, because there were drafts where it was difficult to tell who was narrating who. So I think the narrator has to be clear and the timing has to be clear. Some of that you can do with tense, right? So for me, my present day timeline was in present tense, but sometimes the present day timeline was the slums demolition, and sometimes the present day timeline was the girls at a certain age. So that was difficult to juggle. And then I put the past in the past, but sometimes you had multiple overlapping past timelines. So I think one thing that I was in a workshop with this memoirist, Melissa Febos, and one thing she told us to do was to actually print out our manuscript and cut it out and then color code the different timelines and see if everything is making sense. And then sometimes if you do that, you can actually move things around so that it makes sense. I think one more thing I'll say, and then I would love to hear what Andheli had to say, because she jumps around a lot in time in her books, is that the flashback has to make sense. So for example, if in one of the sections of the book, there's a girl, Deepa, who's visually impaired, and her mother has pulled her out of school. So right when you get the reveal that her mother has pulled her out of school, you flash back to the scene in which her mother makes the decision to pull her out of school, and you find out why. So when you're flashing back, I think things have to fit together so that it feels like it's moving the story forward and not just some random flashback in time. That's what I would say.
Right, okay.
What did you want me to answer to this, Rohini? I'm not really sure.
No, I think what you said, like, just about when you're making this time shift, you also, are there craft? I think it's a question of craft actually. How do you shift? How do you make those shifts? And I think both of you have kind of answered. You'd like to add anything?
No. I just like to make a lot of notes, make a lot of like stream of consciousness writing about where this is going and what's happening. That's generally what I do before I write any book.
Yeah. Like, I guess there's no easy way, like in movies, or to give them a different haircut or something. So we need to do much more work. Yeah. So they've asked, Mathangi, did you base your characters on anyone you met in Bangalore? I think you've answered that. Then there's a question, do you brain dump all your ideas and mind map all chapters before starting writing your book? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Mathangi.
Sorry. So I recently learned these two words. So apparently there's two types of novelists. There's plotters who plan everything out, and then there's pantsers who fly by the seat of their pants. I fly by the seat of my pants. I can't plan anything. I write until I figure out what's happening. But Andheli, what do you do? Do you plan things ahead of time?
No, I started out as a pantser, but now I'm a proper plotter. So
your plots are so tight. Your plots are so tight and well done that makes sense to me.
No, I actually, I use it as an excuse to hoard on stationery and buy notebooks. So, because every time I'm starting a new book, okay, I actually need a new book to write, so I scribble a lot. I like to put pen to paper and make notes. And this is basically the plotting, more or less, is a stream of consciousness talking. It's like I'm talking to myself. So this is going to happen, and that's going to happen, and this is going to happen, and maybe I'll bring this here. So this is just me rambling, like kind of getting things in order over here before I actually start writing. So I do plot, but not like to the point where I have Excel sheets. I cannot do plotting.
I know people who do that.
Yeah,
I know people who do that.
I will, probably I will stop writing if I have to, plot on an Excel sheet.
And then you
Well,
revisit.
I think
No, I kind of revisit it sometimes if I've forgotten what's going to happen, or if I had some plans for a character, but the character's decided to do something else. That happens a lot. But then I kind of like to, go back to it and just, it's like a refresher. This is what I initially meant to make this book, so I better stick to it. Or if the new idea is better, then okay, fine. It's like kind of a last moment decision that I have to make. But I definitely like to plot my stories out.
Okay. Mathangi, you want to add anything?
no, I was just going to say, I think that one of the downsides of plotting is like Andaleeb said, people get very fixed on what their original idea was. And I think something in between is good, because then you can surprise yourself with new ideas and the plot might go in a different direction.
So this is not like set in stone. I give
Yeah.
myself leeway to change. If I feel like it needs to change, I let it change.
It's so admirable. My God, this flying by the seat of my pants is what I also do. So there's this question. Yeah, you have, Andaleeb, you've written only family novels. So why did you think of writing a ghost story? Does the bungalow in Bangalore really have ghosts?
So I don't know about that. There's actually there's some I'm sure there are ghosts in those bungalows, whatever, I don't know. It's fun, writing horror is fun. I think a lot of people like to get scared. I don't like what comes after that. I'm actually I'm a scaredy cat myself, so I don't know why. But I think writing horror is something I did because it put me in control. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to scare people, so I'm not going to get scared myself. So that was one of the reasons why I kind of thought I'll do this.
Mathangi, someone says that did you, the characters, it's a thing of appreciating your characters, because especially the mothers and grandmothers were so realistic, someone says. And actually, and a question is about, for both, about setting it in Bangalore. What is the specific reason that Bangalore alone is known as IT hub? Why not other cities in comparison? I think maybe you can answer it sort of like, the thing of stereotypes. So did you ever think of Bangalore as IT hub? And were you both trying to find some of your stories, Andheli, are set in that world where some of them work in that kind of place or near it, or have friends in that world, but you're also making conscious choices of kind of stepping away from that stereotype, maybe?
No, for me it was the opposite. I didn't have that luxury of experience to write about all this. I had that very limited perspective of a family, of a home, to write about that. And I think one of the reasons why I worked very briefly for 2 years. I've been working on and off, but I worked for 2 years in a software company as a marketing person, nothing to do with software. But so it kind of gave me so much insight into a whole new world. All the office setting and all that, which kind of a lot of it kind of came through in 29 going on 30. So for me, it's never been about IT hub. Was something I actually wanted to write about that, but in a fun way. But I just felt like, again, not equipped to write, because I've lived this very closed, shut in life. And so I kind of really envy people who've had a variety of experiences. And I'm like, oh, I wish I could just exchange that part of their lives, so I would know what that experience was like. Because for a writer, all experiences are worthy of making into a story, so I think no experience is spared. So for me, it wasn't like Bangalore. We've already talked about it the whole hour, because it feels home for me, and I feel connected to it. So that's why I write about Bangalore. But yeah,
Mathangi?
I wasn't exposed to IT at all, really, while I was there, because my field work was all in, it was in slums. So there was the only IT I really saw was, there's a scene in the book inspired by this, was engineers coming with big buckets of, speaking of biryani, big buckets of biryani. That was like community service. And then they would come and do some games with the kids. Like they would do some games all in English. And so these poor Connecticut kids had no idea what was going on and would talk about it after. And all of the engineers were mostly from North India, actually. So they didn't really know, they couldn't communicate. But I wasn't interested in that. I don't know. I think if I had been interested, maybe I would have found a way to write about it. But I was more interested in the places where I was doing my research, and I'm more interested in like what Andaleeb, someone mentioned Andaleeb Wajid, but I'm interested in families. I'm interested in women. I'm interested in girls. I'm not that there aren't families and women who are engineers, but I just wasn't interested in that side of it.
So there's one question. Is there a place you'd like to write about that you haven't been to? Bernadette Prakash's question.
Oh, that's my aunt. Hi, Auntie. Thank you for coming.
So I don't know. There's so many I can't name. Go ahead, Mathangi.
So it's not a place I haven't been to, but my husband and I, before we had our daughter, we went to Zanzibar, which is like just to give you a sense of it, all the street signs were in Swahili, Gujarati, and English. And it was just such a fascinating place, and I would love to go back there and live there and write a book about there. But places I haven't been to, I can't think of any. Maybe, I mean, I have thought about, this is really crazy that I'm even admitting this, but I have thought about writing, I have an idea for a book that takes place kind of like in a spaceship on the way to Mars. So maybe that's a place that would, like a YA book, but it's going to be a while before I write that, I think. That needs a lot of research.
Yeah. So really, Andaleeb, you picked Maldives, right? And then you did it. You actually wrote it.
Yeah, I did it.
So how much research do you, by the way, Mathangi, anytime you have to go, please say it, because there's questions for you I'd like to ask. So
okay, this is actually, I have to go like in the next 5 minutes.
So let me ask.
Okay.
How much research do you think is necessary to write fiction? How much is real and how much can be licensed?
So I research a lot. I mean, my Heaven and Dear Mrs. Naidu were from a 2.5-year ethnographic project, and then another kind of 1.5-year policy project and interview project I did through the job that I was doing. I think it depends on what you're writing about. Even the memoir I'm writing now, I'm doing a lot of research, actually. I think fiction requires a lot of research if you want it to sort of resonate with people and feel real. And I think for me, it's also, I've read so many books about India or South Asians in the US, where I get to this point where I'm like, oh, that is so wrong, that you just got that really wrong. And I never want my reader to have that experience. And so that's why I do a lot of research.
Can you give an example of the kind of, what are you looking for when you're researching?
I'm looking for little details to be correct. So things like slang and expressions, things like what is inside the houses, what are people wearing, how do people react to situations. There's sort of two levels, right? There's the level of the details of how people talk and how they live, and then the details of how someone would react, right? Or what would actually happen. Like I keep talking about the rules of the world, like those kinds of details.
Okay. Andheli?
Yeah, it's I don't do that much research when I'm writing about, say, if I'm writing about a Muslim story, I actually don't do any research, because I'm like, okay, whatever lived knowledge there is, I'm going to just write about it. It's very easy, and it flows much more easily. But of course, I have to do research about place, about localities, if I'm setting it in a particular place. And I used to be very reluctant to do this initially, setting within a place, but also within a locality. But so now I'm more comfortable talking about those places in my books. So I think but research, yes, they're not very research heavy in a sense. I talk to people, and I try to, especially the books where I'm setting it in the whole workspace, even though I was there, again, that was a very brief period of time. So I like to talk to people, I ask questions, make notes. And but the research is something that should not be evident when you're writing it. It should not feel like it's a researched book. That's the difficult part.
So I'm sorry, but I have to go. I got accepted into this writing workshop like 2 days ago, right? So I need to go. But this was so great, you guys. I wish that we were all in the same country and that we were allowed to hang out again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mathangi. I was just about to quickly squeeze in another question for you, but if you have
give me that question and then I'll go.
So, Ms. Subramanian, you mentioned that you've already felt the difference in parenting styles. So how would you define your particular way of defining culture?
Oh, God. Well, I'm trained as an anthropologist. So for me, culture is always changing. It's something that's dynamic. But it's just, as a writer, it's just the feeling of a place. and the decisions that people make, and sort of what decisions are accepted and what decisions aren't. Is that a good definition?
It's as good as any.
Okay. So I'm gonna leave on that note.
Okay, bye. Bye,
Bye.
Mathangi.
Thanks, you guys.
Really great.
Thank you, Mathangi.
Yeah, this was so great. We'll have to do this again in person sometime.
Looking forward to many more books. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
So, Andheli, would you like to answer
Yes,
that?
sure.
And yeah, the culture question.
The culture question, can you just repeat it?
No, so then I'll ask you what the person is asking. This is Nasheed from Mysore, based in France. How would you identify yourself? Because they said that thing of belonging, that it's a pertinent question. I would like to pose this question to Ms. Andaleeb. How would you identify yourself as if you were asked to define identity defines you, or the place you are living in defines you? I think you've answered it, but maybe go for it.
No. How do you identify?
How do you identify yourself? By the place, or do you feel like, I think that's the question.
I don't know. I haven't really thought about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll ask you another one. When you choose a real place instead of an imaginary place, isn't there a risk of limitations of food, architecture, art specific to that place?
Yes, limitation is, it's actually not a limitation. It's a place of learning where, you research and you write about it, and, so fictional place, of course, I can make up whatever I want, which also is not easy, which is very tough. But writing about a real place it has its, I wouldn't say it's limitation, but I think it's more of a lot more hard work, a different kind of hard work.
What do you mean?
As in, the making sure that the whole authenticity of the place, the people, or even the places, the roads that you write about, do they really exist? And how would I know if I've not been there? Or even if I'm writing about a place in Bangalore, there's so many parts of Bangalore I've never been to, So how do I authentically write about this? So it takes a lot of, I wouldn't say guesswork, but I would say definitely, talking to people, asking questions, research. So that's where it goes.
Someone's asked, S. Prakash is asking, how satisfied are you when you fall back on someone else's descriptions of a place that features in your book?
Someone else's description of a place, if someone else has talked about a place that I've written about. I would say, I think, it really depends on how well the other person has described it. And if it's it's very subjective. If I feel that this person has completely missed the point, and obviously I'm not going to be happy. But, but then again, that's also a function of what this person has experienced. No? The person,
for example, like, I guess if you've written about Bangalore, how have, in other books that you've read, how when Bangalore is described, what do you feel works and what do you feel doesn't work? Generally, we can say, you don't have to name anyone.
No. I really do like so many writers who've written about Bangalore specifically.
Actually.
Aruna Nambiar, her book recently, Monsters Still Lurk. It's set in Kerala, it's set in Bombay, it's also set in Bangalore, very recognizable parts of Bangalore. There is, Zainab, what's her name? I'm sorry, Zainab Sikandar. She's written a children's book, which is set again in Bangalore, but which, she changed the names of the places, like Russell Market is something else, but you immediately know that it's Russell Market. So, I think that sense of identification, if it's been done well, is really, it's very strong, and it also adds to the enjoyment that someone, that aha moment is there when someone else also has written about the thing that you kind of really relate to. And if it's not done well, then you really can't do anything about it.
Okay. Yeah. So I think I'll ask you this last question, which is actually about for aspiring writers. How do you go from first draft to final submission? Please give some tips on editing a novel.
Oh God. So first draft, is basically, whatever. See, self-editing is not easy. And, you really need to get someone else to read it, someone else to give an objective point of view to what works or not. So you either get a beta reader or hire an editor, someone who will find the flaws, because you're too close to your own work uh, to be able to, like, point out. So yeah, so from first draft to final submission, I actually don't do that much work. I think, I've grown arrogant over time. So, I just, so I write this and then I look at it like maybe a couple of times after a certain time period has lapsed. And then I'm like, okay, it's good for submission. But I wouldn't recommend that to everyone. So, because of course, I also have to do several rewrites. My editor comes back and says that this doesn't work or that needs more work. So you definitely need a third person, an objective eye to look at how it is.
No, so if I can add a little bit about that thing of since I haven't written that many books and I'm still really afraid, so I think I get so for my non-fiction book, someone asked if my book is fiction or non-fiction. It's for sure it's non-fiction. The decision to not fictionalize was because I didn't know the world enough to fictionalize. Actually, I felt it was about Sri Lanka, and I felt I could at least control what I knew, but I couldn't control what. I didn't know. Like everything that I was finding was real was not something I could have even imagined. So I stuck to what I was seeing because that was fantastic enough for me. And then, of course, the editing part. I think, as you say, getting people who know that world, who are from that world, to have a look. That kind of person. Then someone I looked up to as a writer to look at look at the thing, and suggest brutally feedback. Yeah. And then see from that what I can incorporate, what I can't. There will be suggestions that will say major changes in plot or major changes in, okay, I think these two should meet or something when they have never in the book. So I would ignore those, but I would take it's an emotionally very difficult time, but it needs to be gone through by anyone. Yeah.
I think, internally you kind of know that this part needs work. And you just need that sort of validation from someone that this part is a little weak and it needs work. But sometimes it can come out of the blue, as in, you may not expect a certain criticism or something, a critique, not criticism, a certain critique. And, it takes a lot of, you have to have that sort of acceptance to that maybe you are not right, even though you've written it. So you have to kind of just let it mull over it and think about it. So
and somebody's response to it gives you a sense of if they have misunderstood what you're trying to do, that means work on that.
Yes, definitely.
So I think we should stop sort of now. And is there anything else, Andaleeb, you'd like to add? Because you are somebody that I can't believe how prolific you are. Most people look at your work and think, you're saying many of the things that you've said, you've learned by yourself over time, right? By doing it. And now you are waiting to publish your next book. So this general question, this thing about the pandemic, I wanted to ask, does writers now feel the pressure to have a pandemic in their book, or have had pandemic somewhere in the time, or just any real life incident you feel like, you have to...
No, I am so fed up of the pandemic that it is not getting space in my books, So I mean, I don't want to craft a world. First of all, I'm writing romances. So it would be very unreal, not unreal, very difficult to get my characters to meet if there are, there are no coffee shops. If there are no
quarantine together?
So that's bit of that's been done to death already, like people have already written about love during quarantine, and I'm like, no way, I'm never going to write about that. And I think the way to circumvent that is by just writing about the immediate past, like a couple of years, like say 2018, 2019. I'm happy to set my books as long as possible in that time period, and even going back even further, so that kind of gives you even more freedom to like set your I'm like very happy to write in the past, and not about a point of time where this has kind of come and changed our lives. I mean, eventually I might feel like, but I definitely would not want to write a romance. I might want to write a horror novel or something.
Big time. Yes, please go for it. Horror. The viral zombies. Okay, so thank you so much, Andaleeb, and thank you. And all the participants, all the people who've been listening, and I think the 48 who have stayed behind till now. Really wonderful to talk to you and answer your questions.
Thank you so much for also this, moderating and asking such thoughtful questions, and being such a wonderful moderator, and closely reading our books. So, and thank you, Mysore
I learned.
Literature Festival. So,
Yeah. All
thank you
right.
for
So
that.
we're going
Yeah.
off.